So I'm here today to talk about social justice leadership. And I'll begin with a question. How does large-scale social change happen? The fact that it does happen is undeniable. Colonialism in India, Jim Crow segregation in America, apartheid in South Africa. These were all cruel and unjust systems that endured for generations, and they've been transformed. How does that happen? And a related question. What is social justice leadership? How do we even think about leadership intended to transform these systems? I came here to the Ed School 15 years ago on a quest to understand these matters. And today I want to take you along on the learning journey I took to find some answers. In an important sense, our journey begins here with a group of teenagers at a New England summer camp. I was doing research into youth leadership, trying to understand how various programs engage in youth leadership development. And that research led me here to a program called Camp Anytown. Camp Anytown is a youth leadership program that unites diverse high school students for a week-long residential experience at a camp or retreat center. And over the course of the week, participants engage in intense dialogue of isms like racism, sexism, ageism, and more. It's a powerful program, but there was one particular component of this experience that stopped me in my tracks. On Friday morning, the day begins as every day has with participants gathering in a circle before breakfast. But on this morning, something unusual happens. The participants are separated into groups: whites, Jews, Asians, LGBT, Latinos, blacks. And then they're told, don't make eye contact with members of other groups, and don't talk to members of other groups. And then they go into breakfast, and the white kids get to go first, and they get double servings. The black kids have to go in last, and they don't even have a table to sit at. They call it the separation exercise, and it's an attempt to simulate an unjust, hierarchical, segregated social system. Essentially, this was a simulated civil rights movement. This was a chance to study large-scale social change in a petri dish. So I spent the next 3 years of my life observing and analyzing 3 more of these exercises, along with a small, diverse group of fellow researchers. And what we found is that there are important lessons at 3 nested levels of analysis. And here's what we found. First, lessons at the individual level. What were the key qualities of individuals who first challenged the system? Well, first, they had a powerful connection to their own inner voice. At the debrief, these were the participants who said, I just knew this was wrong and I had to do something about it. Other participants were more focused on the behaviors of their peers or the demands of authority figures than they were on their own inner truth. They had what I'll call a balcony perspective. They never got so distracted by events in their own group that they lost sight of the fact that there was a bigger system at work. And finally, courage. It was scary to challenge the status quo, and these participants could handle the discomfort that came with trying to create change. Now, there was a second set of lessons learned at a higher level of analysis that I'll call the intergroup level. And here's what we saw there. First, groups at the top were blind to the system. At the debrief, they would say things like, you guys didn't have a table to sit at? We had no idea. To a remarkable extent, they just didn't understand what was happening in the rest of the system. At the same time, the groups at the bottom mistakenly assumed that the groups at the top were fundamentally responsible for maintaining this whole system, when the truth was they were mostly oblivious. And finally, it was always members of the lower groups who were the first to challenge the system, always. Now, there was a third set of lessons learned at the highest level of analysis that I'll call the whole living system. And here's what we saw there. First, there was a tipping point. In each of these exercises, 30 minutes passed, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, nothing changed. And then a participant took some action and boom, in 10 minutes, the whole system looked different. And once the system tipped, we saw these stunning patterns of self-organization, where individual decisions would lead to the emergence of system-wide behaviors that were clearly not being directed or controlled by anyone. Nonlinearity. It was clear that individual actions could potentially transform the whole system. And finally, interdependence. We watched as events in one part of the system quickly rippled out to influence events in distant parts of the system. Now, these were dynamics we observed watching high school students participate in separation exercises. Several years later, I watched in amazement as these same dynamics appeared on the world stage. In December of 2010, a fruit seller in the nation of Tunisia set himself on fire in an act of political protest. To everyone's surprise, that individual action was a tipping point. And within weeks, we saw the emergence of massive self-organized protests across the Arab world. It was clear that events in Tunisia had rippled out to influence events in Egypt and in Yemen. And within months, regimes that had endured for decades were deposed in a process that continues to unfold today. Now, I don't want to oversimplify anything as complex and ongoing as the Arab Spring. But the similarities between these real-world events and the dynamics that we observed watching these high school students was unmistakable. And I do think it's fair to say this: we cannot understand this type of large-scale social change if we don't understand how living systems work. And there came a moment on my own learning journey where I recognized something powerful. These dynamics are not just some interesting new behaviors. This is a new paradigm that challenges us to question everything we think we understand about reality. Now, the old paradigm was created by this guy, Sir Isaac Newton, and for 300 years, we've been living in the worldview that he created. It's been invaluable for understanding the movements of the planets and the workings of the material world. It's helped us achieve miracles in the realms of machinery and technology. But the defining characteristic of a living system is that it is not an inanimate machine. It's alive. It has consciousness. It's sustained by things like meaning and purpose and identity and dignity. Living systems learn and grow and evolve and love in ways that no machine ever has. And it is in the encounter with that aliveness that Newton's paradigm falls apart. Let me give you some examples. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is Newton's third law of motion. The only problem is that it's not a law that applies to living systems. Living systems operate with nonlinearity. Individual small actions could potentially transform the whole system. Here's another example. Entropy. This is the idea that all energy flows from a state of order to a state of disorder. And if we leave a system alone, it immediately begins to disintegrate towards chaos. It's also not a law that applies to living systems. Living systems self-organize. Leave them alone and they may look chaotic for a while, but we can trust that in time, order will emerge from within. Now, quantum physicists have been challenging Newton's paradigm for over a century. But in my own field of leadership, we've only just begun to recognize how profoundly the way we think about leadership remains grounded in Newton's paradigm. Too often we think that our organizations and our institutions can be engineered and then managed like machines. And we understand the work of leadership to be providing direction and control. And then we think that if we increase levels of direction and control, we should expect to see an equivalent increase in the type of change we're trying to create in the world. And then we're mystified when complex public problems endure for decades despite our hard work and our noble intentions. So if we want to transform the injustices that remain entrenched in living systems today, we have to begin operating with an understanding of leadership that is grounded in an accurate understanding of how living systems work. And what's exciting is that scholars have begun to illuminate this alternative understanding. And what's amazing is it's remarkably simple, even if it's not always so easy. To create change in living systems, connect the system more to itself. And this is exactly what we saw in those separation exercises. It was always a moment when a participant forged a new connection across some boundary that kept the system connected from itself, that catalyzed a process that eventually transformed the system. Now, for a long time, I thought that this was it. I thought that this was the big idea. But after several more years of study, I had an insight that illuminated a deeper, hidden dimension of this principle. And the insight is this: we are, each of us, living systems unto ourselves. We are microcosms embedded in the macrocosm. And this principle doesn't just apply to the work we have to do in the world around us. It applies to the work we each must do in the world within us. Remember, in those separation exercises, it was always participants with a powerful connection to their own inner voice who were the ones to challenge the system. And in that moment, there's a direct connection between that individual's refusal to tolerate injustice in the world outside themselves and their refusal to tolerate disconnecting from their own deepest beliefs in the world inside themselves. And the key insight here is that the journey towards connection in the outer world and the journey towards connection in the inner world are not just parallel processes. They're interconnected. And so I leave you with this call to action. And this goes out to everyone who aspires to practice social justice leadership or who dreams of creating large-scale social change. Undertake the dual journey. Commit to engaging both inwards and outwards in your quest to create change. Because to focus only outwards on the experiences of others or on matters of metrics and impact is to turn our backs on some profoundly important inner processes that ignite and sustain leadership and change in living systems. On the other hand, to turn only inwards and focus only on our own individual pursuit of wholeness and truth is to turn our backs on the very real problems of the worlds around us. And the deepest lesson I learned from my own learning journey was this: quite simply, the work of inner change and the work of outer change are too interconnected to ever separate.